For this assignment and this demonstration, we're going to be making a gallery for virtual reality or other forms of XR, where we're going to be presenting 2D images like we see here in a 3D space. The images I've chosen for this demo are these kind of fun prints I was making with kids over the summer, where you kind of cut a corner of a rubber block and rotate and tile it to make a pattern. So essentially, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a space that looks kind of like this. Notice we see the pictures on the outside of the wall, and that's because we're going to be looking at this from the inside out. So the exterior of the structure doesn't really matter. So the first thing you will need is your set of images, and you'll notice that I've got these images in a folder and they're named 1 through 6, which will make things a lot easier for me. And also these images are all the same size and aspect ratio and orientation. And that is going to be really handy for this exercise. If you're planning on using images of different sizes with more irregular arrangements, that will be in the second video if you want to incorporate that. For this video, we're going to keep it simple. So I recommend either editing your set of images or using a set of images that have the same size and orientation. The same resolution isn't crucial, but that's also a good thing. So we'll be taking those images, essentially we'll be building a space like this in Blender, and then we'll be rendering it out into an equirectangular, or in this case, stereo, over under equirectangular image, which can then be viewed in virtual reality. I'll include a link to a cheat sheet of helpful Blender shortcuts. The ones in green are specific to edit mode, and the other ones work for anything. I recommend you can also just screenshot this right now and send it to your phone, because this is formatted so you can keep it on your phone next to your computer. All right, so in Blender, the first thing we're going to do is make a new file. All right, so here is our new Blender file, and we've got, the standard cube, camera, and light. We're just going to go ahead and press A and delete everything. And if you're new to Blender, you'll see that there's this little reticle in the middle of the screen. That is our 3D cursor, which is where things come into the space, and that will be of use to us. The first thing we're going to do here is import our images. Now, it's important, this demo is for Blender 4.2. If you're using a version that's older than this, importing images is different. You can either look for a video about making a gallery from last year on this YouTube channel, or you can just search import images as planes, which is an add-on for earlier versions of Blender. In Blender 4.2, however, we just press Shift-A and we go to Image and we choose Mesh Plane. Now we are going to navigate to our folder, and there's our pictures, and we'll just grab those, all 6, and hit Import Images as Planes. Now, we don't see anything on these images yet, but that's because we're in solid view. So if we go over to the second option here and switch to Material Preview, you'll see there's our images. Now, you'll notice we deleted our light at the beginning of the scene, so if we go to actual render mode, the images will look very dark. So now that we have a little bit going on in our scene, let's go ahead and save. So we'll go to File, Save As, and navigate to the same folder as our assets, and we'll call it Gregory Gallery, and click Save As. It's always a good idea to have your Blender file in the same folder as your assets. It keeps the linkages working well. So these images look great, and for some approaches, we can actually move these around and arrange them into a gallery. For this approach, we just need these images to be set as materials, which they are, so we can go ahead and press A for Select All and X and just delete them. Now, I have 6 images. You may be working with a different number. Because this is going to be a 3DOF gallery, which means we can look around but not walk around, I want to have my images kind of evenly distributed so I can just turn to see them. So a 4-sided room would not be ideal. So I would make a 6-sided room. To do that, we would start with a cylinder. Now, these sides are specific to your project. Another thing that I'm going to do, so here I'll go to Mesh, I'll go to Cylinder, And before I click anywhere, we click this little option that says add cylinder, and now we get a little menu. So we could make a 6-sided cylinder this way. But I think I actually want to also give my gallery a door. So I'm going to switch my sides of this cylinder to 7. And yes, this is not a cylinder. It's just a septagonal prism. But this is the world of mesh modeling, so there's no true curves anyway. So here we have our cylinder, and we're going to go ahead and click on that and press tab, and now we're right in edit mode. So this is going to be a room, which means we're going to be inside it. So we want to flip the normals on this. What does that mean? Normals or faces, and we can press 1 to select points, 2 to select edges, 3 to select faces, have a front and a back. So if we go to the top of the screen here, we can find overlays, and we can go down and find this option face orientation, and we see that the outside of our cylinder is blue, and if we zoom into it, the inside is red. So we just want to press A for select all, and then I'm going to press spacebar for search and type flip, and there's this option to flip normals. And now our cylinder's inside out, and you can see it has this flickery quality to it. We'll go ahead, go back to viewport overlays and turn off face orientation because we don't need to see it. That weird flicker we're seeing is because we're still in material view. I'm going to leave it in material view, but if you're having problems, you can go to solid view. Okay, so now that we're here, we're going to actually press tab and leave edit mode for a moment. And back in object mode, I'm going to go ahead and expand this a little bit. I'm going to rename this to room or gallery. And now I'm going to press tab to go back into edit mode. Number 3, so I'm selecting faces. And I'm going to press A to select all. And the next thing I'm going to do, sorry, just had a momentary pause there. The next thing I'm going to do is next to the overlays, we also have edit overlays, and we're going to turn on edge length. So now we can see all of our dimensions. If you like to work in metric, you can just keep going here. I know a lot of you in this class like imperial, so we can click on this tab that says scene right here. You can go to units and switch it from metric to imperial. And now we have feet. So I want my space to be 12 feet tall. So I'm just going to press A again to make sure everything's selected. You can see if I don't select, it doesn't show the dimensions. It only shows the dimensions of what's selected. So I'll press A. I'm going to look at this straight from the side, and I'm just going to press S for scale the whole thing until these vertical dimensions say 12 for 12 feet. So I'll hold down the shift key to kind of slow this down if I have trouble hitting 12. And there you go, 12. So now our space is 12 feet tall. Now I want my walls to be a little bigger than this. So I'm going to press S for scale again. And this time I'm going to press Shift and Z. So now I'm just scaling it out. And I can see those numbers picking up on the bottom. And I'm going to kind of, or I'll be precise here, I'm going to make my walls 8 feet wide. So now all of our dimensions are either 8s or 12s. Now, you may want varying precision here. We're going to see what we can do, but we're going to lift this whole room up. This red line here, which is the x-axis, if you're looking on X, it'll be a green line, but it doesn't matter. We can think of as our ground. So we're going to press G for grab, Z for z-axis. We want to move this up and put it right on the ground. And you might want to try holding down the control key, which will give you snapping. When I say might, I mean you should definitely do that. And that will snap it right to the green line. If your dimensions are perhaps less round numbers, the snap feature might not help you as much, but it's okay if you eyeball it. All right, so a tricky thing about this room is it helps if we can see in it. So pressing 3, so we're still in face select, I'm going to select the top of this room, and I'm going to press the letter P for separate. It's not very intuitive shortcut, but it is in the list of, it is on the cheat sheet. I'm going to separate this selection. Now I'm going to quickly go back to object mode, and I'm going to take room 001 and just rename it to top. I could also call it ceiling, but I guess I'm being a lazy typer. And then I'll press this little eyeball to hide it. Notice there's a little camera next to it in the outliner here, or scene collection, which means that this is still going to render, even though we don't see it now. back inside the room, we can see that if we rotate it around, because it's a seven-sided shape, we can see that we only have one side that's parallel or perpendicular to either of our world axes. So this wall here is parallel to the green line, which means that I want to leave this wall alone because I want to put my door there because I might expand it out into a hall or connect it to another room. And having it parallel will really make it easier to model there. For these walls, it will be less of an issue. So I will click all these walls. And I'm actually going to make a mistake on purpose right here. I'm going to press I for inset, and you'll see that it just kind of drops down and makes this panoramic inner face. And that's not very helpful. And that was I, by the way, the command. So I'm going to press Control Z. And now we're going to try this one more time. But this time I'm just going to select one face. I'm going to press I and inset. I don't really care what shape the rectangle is or even what size. Just want it to be inset. And I want them all to be the same. So now a great key command that is not on the cheat sheet. I'm going to select this next face and I'm going to press Shift and R. And that is repeat last action. And we will use this quite a bit. Okay, so there we go. Now I want to get the dimensions on these to match my artwork. So I can go around and I can select each of these faces. A nice little shortcut, not one that you necessarily need to write down, is I can press Shift G to select similar and select around the perimeter. And now it just selects all the faces that are that size. So I need to change the dimensions of these. And I want to think, what dimensions do they share? So the width of these rectangles, you can see, follows different angles. You know, they all deviate from the XYZ in different ways. The height of these rectangles, however, are all perfectly in line with the Z-axis. So I am going to I'm going to resize them first on all dimensions, and then I'll resize on the Z. And if that doesn't make sense, you'll see here what I mean. So if you remember, I said your images should be the same size. My images have a ratio of 4:5. If you shot your pictures on an iPhone, the default ratio is 4:3. An SLR or mirrorless camera, the ratio would be 3:2. And if you are using HD or 4K footage as the source for your images, that would be 16:9. And if you're using something else, you will have to check that ratio yourself. So my first goal is just to get these rectangles the same as the ratio. So I'm going to press S to scale, and this is no good. I mean, it's kind of cool, but it's not what we're trying to do. So in order to scale these rectangles without having them all move into each other, I need to change the pivot point. And to do that, I'm going to press the period key. And now I'm going to set my pivot point to individual origins. And now when I scale these, they just scale nicely in place. And I want them to all be 4 feet wide. So there we go, 4 feet wide. And now I can press S to scale again. And this time I'm going to press Z. So they're just on the Z axis. And now I can scale them all down and up again to 5. So now my pictures are all the right aspect ratio. But just because 4 to 5 feet is the easiest expression of this ratio doesn't mean that's what I want the size of my pictures to be, you know? And that's okay, because now that I've seen that the ratio is set, I can just resize them using S and know that it's going to stay even. So I can go really big, I can go smaller. I'm going to go epic. So let's make these pictures, I don't know, I'm just picking this number, feels right, 7.5 feet tall. Okay, by almost 6 feet wide. So that is looking good. We're going to press the period key again, and we're going to switch the pivot point back to the median. And that's important because you don't want to, whenever you use special settings like that, you should set them back afterwards. It's kind of like putting a tool back away in the workshop after you use it. So things are where that you expect them to be, and you don't have unpredictable results. So now that we've done this, we're going to kind of have these pictures stick out from the wall a little bit. So if I just hit E for extrude, they're just going to kind of all go off in some crazy way. You can press Control Z to undo that. But if I press Option E, I get these special extrude options. And I'm going to do extrude individual faces. And now they all extrude in. Now I'm going to press I again for inset. And because these images don't touch each other, I don't have to do it separately. And we have our images inset. I'll press Option E and extrude individual faces again, and this time send them out. And now we have ourselves some nice, classy picture frames. All right, so while we're modeling, let's also make the door. So we'll click on this wall here, and this is going to be just a really simple doorway. If you want to insert realistic looking doors easily, there's some built-in assets called arc mesh, but we're not going to use that. I will right click on this face and choose the option subdivide, and I'll set the number of cuts to 2. If you don't see this dialog, it might be minimized like that, in which case you just open it. And now we have this kind of gridded out, and I'll select this face, hold down Shift, select this face, and now I'll press X, delete faces, and now we've punched a hole in it, which is our door. Now, because we're not going to have like a whole nother scene out here, I kind of want to give us sort of a dark hallway aesthetic. So to do that, we're actually, I think in this case, well, we'll leave the door open. We might actually close it again later. So I'm going to press 2, and now I can select edges. And if I can select this edge and hold Shift and select around, or I can press Option and it'll loop select. And now we've selected all the way around this door. I'll press E to extrude. And you can see it's going every which way, but because this wall is perpendicular to Y, you can press Y and just send it right out. All right. So having done that, I think we want to maybe give our floor a little fancy baseboard. So pressing 3 to have face select, I'm going to select the floor. I'll select the hallway. Now I'm going to press I again, just inset it a little bit. Now we can kind of make our baseboards in 2 ways. One thing we could do is we could actually just press E and extrude and drop the floor. But our floor is already at 0. So another way we can do it is the same way we can loop select edges. I can also select right between these 2 faces here and hold down Option, and it will loop select these small faces. It kind of just tries to follow the loop. Now this looks pretty good, but I don't want this last face here on the outside of the door, so I'm going to hold down the Control key and box select over it, and that will deselect that face. So now that we have these faces loop select, we can look at from here. I can press E to extrude and rise that up. And now we have a nice little baseboard going around our floor. And if we want to get really fancy, well, we don't. We're not going to get really fancy. Forget that. So let's not get fancy. Let's instead get our pictures in here. All right. So we'll click on anywhere, actually. We can just, we can stay in edit mode. We're going to go on these tabs here, and we're going to go down to the material tab. I'm also going to press the letter Z right in the middle of the screen to check my mode. I want to make sure I'm in material preview, which I am. If you're in solid view, you can just press Z and switch to material preview. You can also, of course, click on the same options right up here. We'll go ahead and add a new material. So we click here to add a new material slot, and here to add an actual new material. Don't know why that crashed for a second. And right now that looks the same as the default material, so I'm going to make our walls kind of a little purpley so we can just see them. You can make them a little green, a little red, whatever. That's just what I went with. And we'll just call this material, double click on it to rename walls. All right, and now it's time to go around and add materials to our pictures. So I'll select the first picture, and I'll press plus for add material slot. I'll press assign, and you can see that that's rectangle got a little brighter because it's got no material on it now. And then in this drop down, there are all our pictures from when we imported them earlier. So I'll click on 1, and there it is. And now we'll do the same thing for 2. Add a slot, assign the slot, set it to 2. Add a slot, assign it. Now, one of the reasons we don't do external walls here, in addition to the fact that we don't need them, is we can actually click on the outside of the mesh too, because it's the same face. So we can add another slot, assign, set for material 5, Add another slot, assign, set for material. Whoops, 6. All right, so we got our pictures in here, but they look kind of funky. Um, so to fix that, um, still in edit mode, I'm going to click on this first picture, and I'm just going to press the letter U for the UV unwrap menu. UV unwrapping is kind of a description of how pictures wrap around meshes. You can kind of imagine if you had like a 3D model of a face and you just flattened out all the textures on it, what that would look like. So here we're just going to choose this option, unwrap, for this face. And because the face is the same ratio as the picture, which we were careful about earlier, it just automatically wraps. So now we can actually go to each of these and press Shift R for repeat. And we will quickly get a nice result, though these two look a little strange. Let's see what happened there. You unwrap. Not sure why those were different. You unwrap. So if just pressing U and unwrap doesn't properly align your picture, we will click on one of them. We can actually go to UV editing. And here I'm going to press Z so I can also see the material preview on this side. I'm not sure why that's not default. I'll zoom this out. And here we can see how our UV is wrapped. So it actually didn't get it quite right, but I think it's still close enough for this demo, though I might want to go through all of them and press 2 for edge select and move these edges out. Notice here, though, if we look at this scene, that I can press A to select all, and I can rotate this, and you can see it'll rotate in there. Or if I rescale it, it will zoom it in too. So for instance, if you have a bunch of images that are different sizes, but you just kind of want to crop them all to fit the same frame, you can easily do that here. So I am noticing that the default UV wrapping didn't quite get them. So I'm going to just tweak these a little bit as I go around. Or actually, I'll tweak maybe not all of them. Just tweak a few more so you get the idea. All right. Now we will go back to layout. So we're almost ready to go. I think we need one more material before we do our light, which will be our floor. So I'll press 3 and select the floor and select the hallway. By the way, that weird face issue I corrected earlier, you can avoid that if you just don't do the baseboard, or I might come up with a better method for the baseboard for that in the future. So let's give the floor its own material as well. So here I'm just going to add a new material. I'm going to make a new material. I'm going to call it floor. And in the earlier demo, I had a wood material. And that's actually a sample material from VX Material Library, which is a free add-on that you can find in the extensions settings of your preferences. But for now, we're just going to make a basic material. I'm going to take the floor and I'm going to make it black. You can see nothing happen, and that's because I forgot to assign this material. Assign. So now the floor is black. And then I'm also going to go ahead and make it very low roughness. So we can start to see, I don't need to have that clicked. So you can see if the roughness is 0, we see a reflection of an image. And that's just something for our material preview. So that image won't show. I'm going to make it a little blurrier. So what we will see when we render is a reflection of our pictures on the floor, which should look really cool. If you want to add other materials in the second video for the unusual space, I'll also show some good techniques for getting great materials online. So before we add a light, I'm going to add a couple modifiers to this to give it a little bit more of a sense of realism. I am going to add a solidify modifier. You can see you can add to the thickness there, and it kind of gives our walls a little more dimensionality to them. And then on top of that, I'm going to add another modifier, which is a bevel. And let's zoom in so we can really see a corner. You can turn the visibility on and off of this little screen. Let's go to bevel. So it looks like bevel is not doing anything here, and that's because it's trying to protect our geometry. And because we're not 3D printing or making a game asset, we don't really need to do that. So in this modifier, I'm going to scroll down to geometry. I'm going to turn off clamp overlap, and you'll see it is kind of screwing up our geometry now, but that's just because there's way too much of it. And then we'll scroll up to the amount here. I'm actually just going to type 0 and then holding the shift key, scroll up very slowly. And you can see it just kind of takes the edge off our edges. So they kind of have a more soft quality. And if we want to make them look even better, we can increase the segments. So I'll click once, and I'll click twice, and then we can right click on our model. We're in object mode now, not edit mode, and hit shade, auto smooth. And now you can see we have just much more, especially if we go in here. You can see that our edges just have a more realistic quality. If we turn that off, you can see everything's just kind of razor sharp, which makes it look a little artificial. All right, next thing we're going to add is our light. Shift A, add light. We're just going to have a simple point light here. Press G for grab, Z for Z axis. I'm going to go into wireframe mode and look at this from the side so I can see exactly where the light is. That looks pretty good. And now I'm going to press Z to go into render view. And it's very dark in here, but that's okay. We're just going to brighten up this light. So I'll brighten up the light to 200 watts. And now we can see some light shining on our space. And you can see if I move this light around, it'll affect the shadows and all that good stuff. And we also see a nice reflection of it on the floor. We don't see a reflection of our pictures on the floor though. And don't worry, we are going to get there soon. So now let's add another camera. Or our first camera. So we've added a camera. I'll press G for grab, Z for Z axis, and lift it up. Now this camera is kind of looking down at a weird angle, so we can take care of that, no problem. We're going to press Alt or Option and R, which just sets the rotation to 0. And now we'll press R and X and type 90. So the camera is just looking straight forward. Now if I look, just like that camera, if I just look down from the top on the Z axis, I'm going to go into maybe wireframe mode. I can see exactly where that camera is looking. And I kind of want it to start over here. So I'll press R for rotate, Z for Z axis, just to make sure. I'm going to position it here. Another thing we can do that's kind of fun, I'll go back to render view, is we can look through the camera and press R and Z. And now we can kind of look around inside the camera. Maybe we want to see the doorway too. So I'll put it right there. All right. So we're just about ready to render. I'm noticing that when I look out the door, I just kind of see this grid space. I kind of want it to be dark outside, but I also don't want to lose this ambient lighting that helps me navigate the outside of my model. So I am going to add another object. In this case, I'm just going to add a cube. I could also use a plane, but I didn't. And I'm going to look from the side, press G to grab. I'm going to move it about here. I'm going to press S and Z for scale. Look around this way, S and X to scale it out this way. So we've just got this block here. And now I'm going to give this block its own material. And I'm going to make that material black. I'm going to make the roughness 1. So it's just like a matte black cube. And I'm going to hit G for grab again, Z for Z axis, or Y for Y axis, sorry. I'm actually going to move it so it intersects into the doorway a little bit. And this is kind of a quick cheat, but you'll see, go into camera view especially, now we have kind of a dark corridor. This gray top will actually go away if we turn the top back on. We can see we've got our ceiling, we've got our corridor. If we want fancy crown molding, we can add that in, but I'm not going to do that right now. So now from the outside, we can see there's our scene. I'm going to hide the top again so we can see it. And now we want to make our render equal rectangular. So I'm going to go into camera view again. And now we're actually going to start tweaking our render, output, and camera settings. And we are going to have to kind of go back and forth between them. So first I'm going to go to render and I'm going to switch it to cycles. If you have compatible GPU, it will see GPU compute. Notice we're in a true ray tracing engine now, path tracing to be specific, which means that we can actually see the real reflections in our room. But it also means things render a lot more slowly. So you can see there's this graininess as we move the camera around. So we'll go back to camera view. And The next thing we're doing is we're going to go to output and we're going to set our resolution to 4000 by 2000. Will be a decent resolution for our sphere. While in output, we're also going to turn on stereoscopy because we're making a stereoscopic image. We're going to set it to stereo 3D. And for the stereo mode, we're going to do top bottom. Now, you get to select these things as you render with images, but it's still a good habit to set them here because if you're rendering video, you'll have to do that. You'll have to set that to be automatic. So set here. So now make sure we have our camera selected and we go to the camera settings. Also make sure we're in camera view so we can see what's going on. And now in camera settings, we're going to change our camera from perspective to panoramic and from fisheye equisolid to equirectangular. Zoom in a little. You can see we've got this equirectangular image. It does kind of repeat it forever outside, but don't worry about that. This weird stripe of light we see at the bottom is actually just the reflection of our point light. Equirectangular images stretch out a sphere into a rectangle, kind of like, or just like a classic map of the world. So in the same way that the North Pole, or the South Pole, I mean, looks like a giant continent, this light looks like a stripe. So now the last setting we need to do in camera is we need to turn on spherical stereo. If you don't turn that on, your right and left eyes will not line up properly. That being said, we might actually go with mono for the final upload here, but don't worry about it. We want to get our best result possible. So now we can turn the ceiling back on so we can see the light off the ceiling. And it does brighten up the whole room. More so with cycles than Eevee because it's got really good ray tracing and will really show you how an extra reflective surface will brighten up the room. Now in render settings, we're going to use some really simple render settings. So we can, our sample times are kind of like how many times it sends a bunch of light rays through the scene to kind of make a virtual photograph. We could set a noise threshold. We could set max samples. We're actually going to use time limit here. This is not advisable if you're rendering a video because it means that the noise issues can vary from frame to frame, but for this, it'll work just fine. I'm actually going to set my time to even less than this. I'm going to set it to 3 seconds because we're doing a demo, but you should really set your time when rendering this for your assignment to at least a minute. And because time rendering is just going to cut it off, that means that, you know, weak computer, strong computer, the render time will be the same, but the quality will be different. So you will be able to evaluate that. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to turn off denoise. And now I'm going to go to render and choose the option render image. For most of you, a pop-up will just come up. I have a preference not to do that. So I'm going to go here to the render tab, which I actually like better because I see my render settings next to it. So even though we said 3 seconds, the image is very large, so it has to render it in halves, and it also has to render for 2 eyes. So 3 seconds immediately becomes 12. Now, we see this kind of like cyan red thing. That's because we rendered a stereo image. The preview is automatically compatible with like old school 3D glasses. We're just going to turn that off. We don't need 3D glasses. And we'll go to View, Zoom, 100%. We can see the image looks pretty good, but very grainy. So this problem can be solved with more samples, so a longer render, or another way to set that, so we've got our render settings right here, is we can just turn on the denoise option. This has all sorts of great settings in here. We don't really need to worry about them. I will turn on GPU. That'll probably speed it up a little bit. Still in this render tab here, and I will go to render and render the image again. And as you can see here, you can also hit F12 to render. So there you see it's rendering the first half, the second half. It's going to do the whole thing again. And then our image will disappear for a moment while it does its denoising magic. And now you can see our scene looks very clean. Now, there should be a certain amount of distortion on the floor, but the distortion on the floor looks a little weird here. This distortion of our pictures looks weird too, and that's just because of this kind of sphere on a flat thing distortion. So don't worry about that. And one of the reasons I like to make these 3DOF galleries with lots of walls is because when every picture gets its own wall, and your scene is more like a cylinder than a cube, you get less distortion and higher image quality. So now that we have that, we can just go to the image tab, the image menu right here, save as. RGBA, by the way, means it includes an alpha channel, which we don't need. We don't have any transparency in this image. I'm actually going to save it as JPEG. 90% quality is great. We'll call it render Gregory and save the image. And by default, this is set to stereo 3D top bottom. We can also save it as individual images so that you just have a monoscopic 360 view. So now we'll hit save as, and we have our image. For this assignment, what you'll need to upload is your Blender file and your images. To upload, not your images, sorry, the image you just rendered. Before uploading your Blender file, press spacebar for search, type pack for pack resources. It says here it's packed 6 files, and now we press save again. I'll actually go back to layout view. Save again, and now our images should be included. If you have videos in your file, they will not pack, so that's one of those situations where you really want to have things included in the same folder. So this image can be converted into a video, and metadata can be added, and it can be used on YouTube VR. We can also turn it into a spherical panorama using open source code, like something from 3GS or 3JS or A-Frame, and that will also be included in a future video. But for the time being, we are done.